Hello and welcome to this classical conversation, WFMT's Classical Conversations, in which we have the pleasure of talking with the most engaging people in classical music and the arts. I'm Robbie Ellis, a presenter and producer at WFMT, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have Orbert Davis and Mark Ingram, co-founders of the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic, here for this conversation today. Before we meet them, I'll introduce them very briefly. Orbert Davis is a trumpeter, composer, and educator with a long career on both the concert stage and in the studio. He's been on dozens of albums as a band leader, orchestra leader, conductor, sideman, arranger, and composer, spanning a wide variety of musical genres. He's got many composer commissions to his credit and has played key roles in major film and TV projects, among them as jazz consultant to Academy Award-winning director Sam Mendes for the feature film Road to Perdition, starring Tom Hanks and Paul Newman. And Mark Ingram is a producer of music, film, and TV and educational projects. He produced Home and Away, a Boeing-commissioned project to honor US service members, and he's also secured musicians for on- and off-camera performances for several feature films, including DreamWorks Pictures' Road to Perdition, as mentioned earlier, Universal Pictures' Babe, the one with the pig in it, Columbia Pictures' A League of Their Own, and the Paramount TV series The Untouchables. Mark himself has also performed as a backup singer with such notables as Michael Bolton, Patti LaBelle, and Carole King, to name a few. Orbert Davis and Mark Ingram have been working together for decades in the worlds of music, TV, film, live events, and education. Among their collaborations, in 2004, they co-founded the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic. We'll hear more about that shortly. And in 2010, they co-produced the soundtrack to DuSable to Obama, Chicago's Black Metropolis, a documentary on WTTW, Chicago's PBS station. The Chicago Jazz Philharmonic will be performing music from the documentary in concert this coming Saturday at the K-Rhine Center in Austin on the West Side. But before I talk to them about that, let's see a short clip from the documentary DuSable to Obama.
A man of part French, part West African descent by the name of Jean-Baptiste DuSable worked his way up the French-controlled Mississippi Valley to a place that the Native Americans referred to as Chicago.
Native Americans were fond of saying, the first white man to settle in Chicago was a Negro.
People of color, blacks who had never been in slavery, who had left the East Coast and come just as the white settlers did to find a more prosperous opportunity.
DuSable was very much in the French influence and brought European ideas of commerce into the area. He traded with the Indians.
He had good relationships with the Indian, especially the
He sold bakery goods and other finished items to the Native Americans.
He was the first man, black, red, or white, to see the commercial possibilities of the place and to voice the city's motto.
He didn't live in a quote-unquote rude cabin, and there were smaller structures around that main building.
Chicago's first wholesaler.
It was quite a complex
first
for
meat
the
packer,
time.
and first
He
merchant
became
prince.
part of the environment here in Chicago.
Indeed, DuSable was the first Chicagoan, in fact, and a man worthy of the deed. Well, I can't read it all, but that's part of the story.
Introducing Jean-Baptiste DuSable, the first white man to settle in Chicago, as the documentary put it. That's from the 2010 documentary, DuSable to Obama, Chicago's Black Metropolis. And I have with me, when they turn their cameras on, hello Orbert, hello Mark, the producers, one the composer, one the producer of the soundtrack to that documentary. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hey,
Good
Robbie,
afternoon.
how are you?
Not bad, not bad. So we'll be sampling music from the documentary. As I mentioned, the documentary soundtrack is getting performed this Saturday at the K-Rhine Center, live with the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic. But I thought I'd get to know the two of you first. So Orbert, you are the conductor, music director, artistic director, I guess, of the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic. And Mark, you helped co-found it. How did you two first meet?
With afros. we were, I was, I think, 15 years old when I met Mark. We're both from small towns south of Chicago. And Mark was in like this very, very, very popular band, and they needed a trumpet player. And I could play the trumpet pretty well for my age. And yeah, and Mark and I became best friends just because he was the other horn player and on trombone, and we just clicked from then, and we're still best friends.
Mark, is that story completely accurate?
Yes, it's completely accurate. Only I had the big afro. And Orbert was the epitome of being a country boy. He had coveralls and plaid shirts.
Hey. Too much information.
But it's absolutely true that you two have worked together for decades in a lot of different things. So you were first in bands together. Mark, you've been a singer and a horn player, although you're not doing that so much now. Is that right?
That's correct. I've always been like Orbert and I had bands together. Our main band actually traveled a lot internationally. I was a lead singer and trombone player. What a combination, right? And Orbert was the arranger, music director. He did all the music and everything and rehearsed the bands. But I was always intrigued with the behind the scenes. Even while doing that, I was always intrigued with the business of the music. And so that's why I'm doing what I do today.
So Mark, you'd be the business side of quite a lot of different activities that the two of you have done, and Orbert more of the artistic side. But Orbert, you must be somewhat business minded as well, right?
Well, I'm also the visionary, so I guess a part of that does line up in the business side of things. But the success of both of what we do is the fact that there's times when I can just go 100% artistic, and Mark is 100%, structure and getting things done on that side. And so, in a way, we get twice as much done because we depend on each other to do those things in all of our organizations.
Yeah, to get it done.
Yeah, because if we're talking about the organizations you've got Chicago Jazz Philharmonic, you've got a record label, 316 Records, I think.
16, yeah.
There's Orbert Productions as well, which is a nice little merger of your name. What's that? What's Orbert Productions?
Well, that's basically it. I mean, everything we do has an umbrella of where it fits. Yeah. And so when we produce records, when we do sponsorships or things like that, that's kind of the brand of Orbert Productions. But we also have a company called Discover Music, Discover Life, which is music education, and that keeps us extremely busy. Where on the website it says that I'm the executive director, Mark is the kind of the financial director, but those roles are often switched around, especially when I'm in my artistic world. Mark has to kind of handle everything for a minute, but we also work with great people in CJP and we have the radio show, The Real Deal with Orbert Davis, and so it's a lot. We juggle, but we get it done.
That's right, jazz radio show on WDCB. The WFMT Jazz Network supplies content to that station, by the way.
That's right. That's right.
Well, before we go any further, let's explore a bit more of the music of DuSable to Obama. I'd like to play the main theme from the documentary, and there are a few different musical elements that I'd like the two of you to unpack. So if we can roll the main theme from the documentary, DuSable to Obama.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the main theme from the documentary, and the main melody in that recurs throughout the scoring of the documentary. But Orbit, you composed that. You obviously played trumpet on it too. Pretty handy instrument for documentary scoring. You want to talk us through the different musical elements there, because I hear definitely some West African stuff in there, some jazz stuff in there. Unpack that piece of music, because there's a lot of detail in it.
Well, tying in to what we said earlier about working in especially popular music, it's so important to have the hook. You know, the hook is a thing that you want people to digest very quickly, to remember, to walk away from singing all day long. And so that's kind of an approach I take with all the music I write, whether it's classical, jazz, and not a hook in terms of being totally accessible, but in terms of just something that reaches right to the heart. So for this, the obvious choice of the composer to emulate is John Williams. You know, being that hero music, the perfect fifth. Ba, 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 you know, it's like that says celebration. You know, it says glory. It says, you know, that we're about to be saved from all the villains. You know, so right. So that's one element. The second element is just how do we hear the essence of African culture and the African in America, and that's simply, of course, the djembe with the African drum, the 12/8 time signature, and then also Nikki Mitchell was playing the flute in a very kind of a West African sort of way, improvising. I would say also the most amazing thing that we have at our disposal is the fact that we have musicians of Chicago Jazz Philharmonic. So in whatever we do, you know, I'm thinking of Henry Salgado on trombone, Ernie Adams, our percussionist drummers, playing this huge djembe that he brought in, and Stuart Miller laying down that incredible ostinato bass line. And, you know, it's just, it's kind of like when Duke Ellington wrote for members of his band. He didn't think of assigning parts, trumpet 1, trumpet 2, trumpet 3. He wrote specifically for each person. And so I have that luxury of doing that. So I can think about the film essence, think about the audience, think about the content, but then also the musicians who are playing it.
And I imagine a lot of those musicians will be live in a few days' time. You start rehearsals tomorrow for a live concert production of this music.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It must be so valuable keeping those long-term relationships with the same players. As you mentioned, Duke Ellington and you've both had the chance to write for the same players over a long period of time.
Exactly. And we're all friends. I think anyone would say, if you ask any, you know, actually do this Friday. You meet any Chicago Jazz Philharmonic musician and ask them, what is it like playing? And I guarantee in 5 seconds, the word family would come up. And that's so we provide a very, don't you think so, Mark? We provide a very family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Long years of relationships with people, and as long as Orbert and I have been in this business, you know, I mean, I would venture to say we even have friends all over the country that we can call on, you know,
the world.
any given project. Yeah, the world, right? Any given project. Yeah. And it's just a blessing to have that. You know, you have a great relationship with a musician when you call them for a job and they don't ask you how much.
Never.
You know.
Yeah. So
that's a great relationship.
How did let's say the Orbit Mark conglomerate acquire the job of scoring DuSable to Obama? How did the music come to land in your lap?
Yeah, well, that's the genius of the producers and directors and editor of the project, Barbara Allen and Dan Andrews.
Yeah.
We've known Barbara for a long time, and every time I see her, she said, "You're going to be my Terrence Blanchard," you know, reference to Spike Lee's composer. And I thought she was crazy. I'm like, I don't write documentaries, you know. But I was part of a project that Dan produced called Rises: 4 Lives in the Arts. And that's when we really got a chance to meet Dan and work with him. And oh my goodness. And I think that when they landed this project, that they called right away. And it really came together fast. Mark was very influential in helping them think outside of the box in terms of funding, you know, securing a funder that would simply sponsor mostly the music. You know, that was the most important thing was how can we effectively do this on really kind of a smaller budget to make it sound big, but not kill the bank,
Not a John,
But,
not a John Williams budget, right?
Oh my
No,
goodness.
no, you're not employing the London Symphony Orchestra, unfortunately.
Right.
Oh man.
But you probably appreciate this. I can't remember the name of the trumpeter, but just getting off topic a little bit. There was an LSO trumpeter whose very, very, very first day of work was recording the main theme from Star Wars.
Oh wow.
Wow.
I
His
could see
very
that.
first day of work in that orchestra, he lays down that score. I mean,
Wow.
what a time.
Wow.
That's awesome.
What a
Yeah,
time.
That's cool.
But
That's
yeah.
that's a dream. That's a dream for us to be able to use the full symphony orchestra, all 80 strong, on a film project. So we'll get there.
Yeah. Well, let's go into what the documentary is about. The title is DuSable to Obama, Chicago's Black Metropolis. It was in 2010. Of course, there's been 12 to 13 years worth of history of Black Chicago since then, but come up to 2010. What does the documentary trace? What does it deal with?
It's the funny thing is that I think it's so easy to kind of pigeonhole it into Black history and say, well, this is Black history, it has to do with African Americans. But anyone who sees the film sees that it's much, much more than that. Especially those of us who have lived the history, that it's not simply, okay, let's just document all the Black accomplishments. Like, we think Black history, and of course, students are making papers on who invented the stoplight and the super soaker, and we say that individual was Black. This is much, much, much larger than that concept. It's really about this heroes who changed and developed Chicago. And when you think about DuSable himself, I love that line in the documentary that the first white man was a Black man. And the point is, it doesn't really matter. It really doesn't. When you think of all these heroes in our time, Harold Washington, oh my goodness, Johnson, publications, all these things that are part of the documentary just shows this development of Chicago that everyone can relate to. And then there's Barack Obama, of course.
Yeah, it was definitely a moment in time, 2008, 2009, 2010 to make this documentary. So I'd like to play a couple more clips from the documentary itself, and we will get to hear, Orbert, your music. These two clips deal with times from the early to mid 20th century. We've got one about Robert Abbott, who founded the Chicago Defender. Do you remember what music you wrote for that? I'm trying to remember what we're going to hear now.
The hard part about this is that when we first approached the film, Barbara Allen would not show me any clips. And I studied a little film, writing, and I know how to transfer the codes and the timings and the syncing and everything. No, she said, I want an opera. Just write the music and I'll edit the film to it. But that's actually, it's genius, because it becomes sort of this jazz collaboration where the music now becomes center stage, and connecting to what we see in the film. So I think the Robert Abbott connection is tied into aviation, if I believe. I'll be honest, I don't remember. But for our concert, we tie in the Chicago Defender development into the aviation development with Bessie Coleman. So we use a piece called Good News for the Brown Bomber. So this will be good for me to remember exactly what it was.
Yeah, definitely early 20s style. And then after that, I do have to issue a warning. The next clip that we're going to play contains graphic images of the body of Emmett Till. Of course, these are images that the family of Emmett Till wanted the public to see at the time. Let's play those two, and then we might be able to talk about the Orbit, how you handled those Emmett Till sequences musically after that. So let's roll the next two clips, starting with Robert Abbott.
The World's Columbian Exposition drew many African Americans to Chicago, including a Southern man who was inspired by what he saw and heard. Robert Singstack Abbott decided to relocate to Chicago. He saw it as a place of great opportunity. He enrolled in Kent Law School, but after graduation, couldn't find success as an attorney.
Somebody just told us that, Robert, you're too Black to win a case in court. Now you just might as well hang it up.
Abbott's frustration would lead him to publish a newspaper to advocate for his people. the Chicago Defender, founded in 1905.
And he told my father, said, John, I started the Chicago Defender to help the suffering masses of my people. And one day I woke up a millionaire.
The Defender covered the news of Chicago's Black Belt, a narrow strip of land only 4 blocks wide and 2.5 miles long, south of the Loop. The paper published stories about all aspects of life in the Black Belt, including the entertainment district known as the Stroll. From the Stroll came new music and old behaviors. Most establishments featured colored sections, relegating blacks to the worst seats in the house.
I want the world to see what they did to my son. And they take photos that are published within Jet magazine and circulate all across the United States.
Most people here had experienced in their lifetime someone who had been lynched. My mama and daddy could describe in detail friends of theirs who had been lynched.
Young people saw Till's body in Jet magazine.
I made the connection to Emmett Till because I believe Emmett Till and I were the same age.
Young people heard the story about Till's funeral in Chicago.
I vaguely remember going down. It was a long line of people. They had an open casket, and they had the people who murdered Emmett Till had defaced them.
And young people said, that's a young boy who represents me.
Emmett Till's murder took place in the summer of 1955. December 1st, 1955, kicked off the incident with Rosa Parks.
2 examples of black-run media in Chicago's history. Of course, the Chicago Defender, a long-time newspaper, which has now gone digital only. And of course, the family of Emmett Till publicizing how brutally he was murdered in the 1950s there. And Orbert, as composer, I mean, you have to deal with some pretty heavy subjects.
Yeah, absolutely. This was just solo flugelhorn that I played, and you could. I grew up right on the banks of the Kankakee River, where my house was actually right on the bank, and I spent hours just using the river as a backdrop to practicing. You know, where it's very open, very free. So I took that concept for this, you know, and basically improvised around the theme and ended with the theme, but just thought of a solo gospel singer just pouring one's heart out, you know, and using, you know, the developments of the melody. And that's what I love about being a jazz musician, is that I rely on spontaneous composition. Of course, that's what jazz is all about, is creating melodies in rhythm and time of the moment. But I also love to compose that way too, soloistically, and also with the ensemble. When we're kind of piecing the Emmett Till segment that we're calling Civil Rights for our live performance, well, we'll start with the solo flugelhorn, but then members of the band will join in, and all the way until we get to the riots on the west side of Chicago and Martin Luther King's death, and where everybody in the ensemble will create spontaneously. And the danger of that is, you know, it can sound like chaos or seem unstructured, but it's actually an art that takes a lot of practice to it's like having a conversation. If we were all to talk at the same time, we have to still balance as much as we say with how we listen. So yeah, I love doing that.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of jazz improvisation, when that all comes together like that, unscripted, you know, unrehearsed, so to speak. It's magical.
It is an interesting concept, taking cuts from a documentary, which by necessity, you're writing these 45-second long, 1 minute long, 90-second long cuts, and making them into a cohesive concert. I mean, Mark, you must think of how you turn documentary music into a cohesive concert piece, because the needs are quite different.
Yeah, and the programming pieces, that's what I like the most about what we do with Chicago Jazz Philharmonic. Everything is thematic, you know, even our regular concerts, it's a theme to everything we do. And it's more than just, of course, the music is the most important, but it's more than just playing the music. It's a visual, it's artistic, it's visual art with music. Of the program is real important to me from start to finish. Someone asked me the other day, yesterday, are you nervous about the concert coming up? I'm like, no. Are you excited? I'm like, no, I'll be excited when it's over. And that's because it's always like, no, I'm on until that last note. And then it's like, oh, we did it. It worked.
We did it.
And we did it.
That's right. Yeah, I was going to say last night we had the way we rehearsed to effectively get a lot done and within a short amount of time is I bring the rhythm section together first, and we talk through things, play it. Everything we played last night. We'd play a few minutes. I'd say stop, save it for the stage, because it's at a point when it feels so good and it's so right, and people tend to think of this, polar opposite between jazz and classical. Like, well, classical musicians are reading music all the time. Jazz musicians don't read, or they don't have to read music all the time. But everybody in Chicago Jazz Philharmonic are third stream. So expert readers, expert improvisers. So there's points when we just go with the feeling, and if it feels good, stop, save it for the stage.
Yeah, that was the other thing that was so.
Go ahead. We also are featuring Maggie Brown, Chicago's treasure. Oscar Brown Jr.'s daughter, who's she's singing, but she's also reciting two poems of Langston Hughes, and we tie that into the World War I, World War II. There's a poem called "Will V Day" or "Victory Day be Me Day." Excellent. And there's also a poem called "Freedom's Plow," where we talk about this building of American society with hands and hearts. And it's amazing that poem was written so long ago, because it relates to today in so many ways.
Of course, Langston Hughes, his work appeared in the Chicago Defender. There's so much that's interconnected in this documentary. I'd just like to mention, of course, you can see in the chat that you can watch the complete documentary online. Do it after this conversation. WTTW.com/DuSable. But this next clip is not from the documentary. It's from Chicago Tonight, which is, of course, the news show on WTTW. And Orbert, you've been on that show a number of times, and you got to be on this show performing live with a quartet of yours. I've really liked the tune "The Willis Wagon." Do you want to just introduce a little bit of the historical context to what Willis wagons were?
Sure. Many people will remember, especially in the 1960s, late 60s, when certain schools would bring a trailer, basically a trailer, to sit in the parking lot or the back of the school. And it was first of all to just give more space for extra classes, they would say. I'll put it that way. But it became a sort of a thing where, the kids who would go to the wagon would need extra help, and it sort of tied into this racial aspect of schools that had that wagon. But I believe that either mayor or commissioner, whose last name was Willis, or maybe it was superintendent of schools, Willis, that it was dubbed the Willis Wagon.
And I really like the music. It's got this sort of flinty, defiant quality. In New Zealand English, we'd call it nuggety. It really, yeah, it got some tenacious quality. Anyway, let's hear the music. Let's hear Orbert Davis plus Combo performing the Willis Wagon live on Chicago Tonight back in 2013.
And now performing the song "The Willis Wagon" is Orbert Davis on trumpet, Jeremy Kahn on keyboard, Stuart Miller on bass, and Ari Brown on the tenor saxophone.
music for educational equality protests, shall we say, the Willis Wagon. Orbert Davis, that was you back in 2013 on a Chicago Tonight set with fewer TV screens and a former host, Phil Ponce, who, of course, no longer works for the program full-time by any means. I'd just like to say to the audience, you can put your questions for Orbert Davis and Mark Ingram in the chat. We will get to them shortly. We've got some time. And, of course, you can also watch that entire Chicago Tonight segment. Tim Russell has put that in the chat as well on the WTTW News website. So I've got a little bit more from the documentary that I'd like to play. And I'd never heard, if one of you would want to talk about this, Afro Cobra. I hadn't heard of Afro Cobra, but it's a grouping of artists, visual artists, I take it.
Yeah. I learned so much. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mark. I have to be honest. I learned so much just about life from this documentary, and from the stories that Barbara and Dan told. I was just telling my wife this morning. It's like, wow, it's so educational. I just recommend anyone to just sit down with a notepad and just write down things that move you, and then go back and do some research. It's very inspiring.
And of course, you can watch the complete documentary. It's nearly 2 hours long. WTTW.com/DuSable. It's also going to be on at 4 p.m. this coming Sunday on WTTW Channel 11. And look, everybody, please put your questions in the chat. I noticed that somebody clarified that the Willis Wagons, their formal name were Demountables.
Nice.
In New Zealand, I think in New Zealand would call them porter cabins or something like that. Porter cabins, yeah, or prefabs. That's what they're called in New Zealand schools. Prefabs.
I thought you said potty cabins.
That's exactly that. Yeah.
No, there's the porta potty, which is quite different. But so yes, please put your questions in the chat for Orbert and Mark while we watch a clip about Afro Cobra. That's a group of Chicago artists. And then two very key political figures from the last 40 years who won't really need any introduction. Let's roll those last clips.
Afro Cobra is
the African commune of bad, relevant artists.
That's what the letters stand for.
Afro Cobra has probably influenced every African American and African diasporic artist since their inception.
As a painter, the movement of Afro Cobra is my biggest influence. Their commitment to community.
Most of our images were based on trying to give direction and making positive statements.
A lot of their aesthetics I still incorporate into my work as far as color palette.
Very bright, vivid colors, what was called Kool-Aid colors.
KOOL-AID.
Because everybody drank Kool-Aid at that time.
Reaffirming our humanity as a people, giving the people hope at a time where we needed it most.
And redefining ourselves, we ceased being Negroes, became black people, people of African ancestry, and so forth. We changed the conversation.
Anywhere in the world you go, Israel, Egypt, Rome, Shanghai, Tokyo, Nairobi, Zimbabwe. Now, you go to any of those places and you say you're from Chicago, you know what they'll say to you?
Harold Washington easily won re-election in 1987. But by the end of the year, Washington was dead.
To let you know that Mayor Washington was pronounced dead this afternoon at 1:36.
It was a tragedy, a citywide tragedy, a tragedy for white people, black people, Latinos, and everybody.
For God never takes a rose, but if you look on the stem, you'll see a bud of a new one about to blossom.
I'll see you in the morning, buddy. We will not let you down.
We will not let you down. We will not let you down.
Washington had proved it was possible to win against large political organizations.
Barack Obama's rise is something that is hard to imagine any place but Chicago.
The reason that Barack Obama came out of Chicago, because Chicago is the city of broad shoulders. Power is the ethic in Chicago.
Barack Obama, I think with a fair amount of respect, borrowed the heritage of Black Chicago.
We know how to organize.
And found ways to translate its more appealing elements into a national story.
Thank you, Illinois.
And find a way to contain some of its more controversial elements.
Only out of Chicago.
Barack Obama's story is a story that conforms to the flow, the spirit of the heritage of Black Chicago.
And of course, no introduction needed. Barack Obama, former president of the United States. And we got some questions in the chat. I'd like, the two of you to define exactly what third stream is, because it's not the best known musical term.
Go ahead, Mark. What do you think?
Hey, third stream, how do we say? It's 100% classical and 100% jazz.
So 200% music.
Yeah, 100 squared. I don't know. It is. I think the thing, I think it's going to become, very popular like years from now through a discovery of, the aesthetics of what it is. And it's, as a third stream composer, I consider myself a classical composer living in a jazz world and a classically trained jazz trumpet player, if that makes sense. Because I think one thing we'll discover is that unfortunately for our American culture, we are left choices for what we want to listen to. We say, well, we define ourselves by what we choose. Well, I like classical, I like jazz. But in terms of culture is something you're born into. And no matter what you choose, there's always this element. That's why one of the reasons why Mark and I both are so just in love with Cuba is that there's amazing classical musicians, amazing jazz musicians, but everybody has this common core that's Cuban music, and I think that's one of the things that we have to kind of get away from. We live in a very third stream world. Think in terms of the way that classical music is built and tradition. Yes, that's so important, and it's a part of who we are. But at the same time, we live in a very spontaneous world. We cannot drive on the Dan Ryan these days using a map. You better put the map down, and you better react to everything that's before you, with you, and behind you. And that's sort of how we define third streams. That it's constantly changing. By the time we define it and say, "Here's what it is," it's already changed to something else.
Another question in the chat: are there any similar organizations to the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic elsewhere in the world, or is Chicago Jazz Philharmonic one of a kind?
Well, should there be? No. Thank you.
No, we're the only one. This is it.
No, we can't. Unfortunately, we can't claim that. I mean,
I know.
Third stream is nothing new. I mean, even if one were to study movies and how jazz is used, how classical is used, there's all these elements in between. And I was shaped into a classical composer partly because when I was a studio trumpet player, any given day I played any given music. And it didn't matter what it was. I learned to put the artistry into everything, whether it's playing Copland or whether it's, the Haydn trumpet concerto or anything in between, or sounding like Louis Armstrong, or studying Clifford Brown, or Earth, Wind and Fire, or Shaka Khan, who we saw a little clip of earlier. Yeah. It's all music. There's only 12 notes in music. I mean, in our favorite food, chicken, if you will, it can be served in 1,000 different ways, but at the essence, it's still the base. It's the meat. And in music, we have 12 notes, and what a joy it is to think about these 12 notes and how they can influence and change things when we add culture and add heart and diversity and inclusion. I mean, it's the sky is the limit.
So, Orbert, speak on the Gunther Schuller Metropole connection.
Oh my goodness. Well, Gunther Schuller, man, I was very blessed to know Gunther, as well as work very closely with Bill Russo, two pioneers of third stream. And when you look at their lives, I mean, Gunther was, I think he was 16 years old. He played French horn with the Met, the New York Met. I mean, come on, just virtuoso. And he defined what modern conducting is. I just was reading a book of his, The Complete Conductor by Gunther Schuller. But at night, he hung with Duke Ellington, and Thelonious Monk and Charlie Parker, because there was something about that music that drew him in. So he was the one who coined the phrase third stream. That there's one stream, there's a second stream. But what we do, Chicago Jazz Philharmonic, is to not think of them as separate streams, but to think of the gazillion waves in there where they overlap. And that's what we do in our performances, in our compositions, and in every single one of our performances.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got to wrap this up. We have a comment from Dr. Loris Rayner, who very, very much loved the approach you took to the Emmett Till section, Orbit. And a question, I guess you have to pick one of your babies. What's your favorite piece from the soundtrack from Dr. Rayner?
It's the theme. It has to be
the main theme.
The main theme. There are times, my sons can tell you this, especially all four of my kids. I drive them to school, and we have a gloomy day or it's snowing or something. I would look at them and say, "Hey, you guys are superheroes. You can handle this." And I put on the theme, and we play it like 4 or 5 times, and then we'd sit up and just imagine that. What's your superpower today?
Well, the theme will be playing a large role in the live concert Saturday, February 4th at 7 o'clock at the K. Ryan Center for the Arts, which is Washington Boulevard, 5628 West in the Austin neighborhood. The Chicago Jazz Philharmonic hosting a live concert. And both of you will be there. Mark Ingram, Orbert Davis, thank you so much.
Hey, Robbie, can you just mention how much tickets?
Tickets are $1 per ticket. $1 singular.
That's right.
And you can get the tickets at chicagojazzphilharmonic.org. Also, you can watch the complete documentary DuSable to Obama, Chicago's Black Metropolis on the web anytime, wttw.com/DuSable. And it will be on your tellies, Channel 11, this coming Sunday at 4 p.m. Also repeating Friday, February 10th at 3 a.m. if you keep those hours. Of course, wttw.com/DuSable to Obama. To join upcoming WTTW WFMT community engagement events, please visit wttw.com/events and wfmt.com/events. Thanks to Tim Russell, who is our Vice President of Community Engagement, and to Dane Curry for helping run this Zoom session. And also thanks to Barbara Allen and Dan Andrews, who of course produced the original documentary, DuSable to Obama, Chicago's Black Metropolis. For Classical WFMT, I'm Robbie Ellis. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.